Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the SoDA Series Live. I'm Tom Beck, and I am Executive Director of SoDA. Usually I'm joined by my good friend and colleague, Kristen Bell, but she can't make it today, so I'm running solo. But we're saying hello to you, Kristen, wherever you are today. The SoDA Series Live is a monthly conversation with design leaders from around the world, and we dig into design trends. We dig into the backstory of how they got where they were. We talk about the companies they're running, the challenges they're facing, and what they see on the horizon for the practice of design and creating a successful career in this space. The series is a collaboration between Adobe XD, and SoDA. The SoDA community, for those that don't know, we're a global membership organization for the founders and owners of digital design studios. We have about 95 member companies spanning 20 countries. And the work of SoDA focuses on creating a platform for founders and owners to connect, share knowledge, share resources, and help one another in creating awesome cultures in businesses. So we're thrilled to be here today, and we're thrilled to partner with Adobe on these monthly discussions, and want to thank you again for joining us. So first of all, I want to introduce, before we get into the conversation, I want to introduce Talon Wadsworth. Talon is our host and moderator for today, and Talon's a principal designer at Adobe and works heavily on the XD product, and he's joining us today from San Francisco. Hey, Talon, it's great to see you.
Great to see you as always. I'm trying something new today. I'm usually sitting during these interviews, but I just, like 2 years into the pandemic now, I finally bought a standing desk. So nice. We'll get some new energy today.
I love it. I find it impossible to sit for more than 5 minutes myself, but I think that's been true since I was about 6. Yeah. and for our guest today is Josh Lowman. Josh Lowman is the founder and creative director of Goldfront. Goldfront is a category design studio based in San Francisco, and that's a really intriguing term, and I'm not going to give that away. We're going to talk about that today in the discussion. What is category design and what it means. But big thanks, Josh, for joining us today. And Josh is also calling in from San Francisco, so it's great to see you, my friend.
Hi, it's good to be here. I'm sitting down today because I'm old school. So,
hey, look, it takes all kinds. It takes all kinds.
Thank you for accepting me.
Absolutely. Yeah. So before, I'm going to drop off the camera here in just a second, but before I do that, for those of you who've joined the discussion, I will be following the discussion in LinkedIn. So feel free to make comments in the LinkedIn comments thread. Introduce yourself. Let us know where you're from. And feel free to pose questions throughout the conversation. I'll track that. I'll track those questions and get them to both Talon and Josh to address at some point during the conversation. So without further ado, I'll turn it back over to you, gentlemen, and have a great conversation today.
Great. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Josh.
Hi.
Such a pleasure to see you this morning. You know, just a little setup here. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite a while, mostly because you and I share a connection, and we have for a very long time now, but we've never met. And this is like the first time that we actually get the chance to actually talk with one another. You know, after seeing each other on Instagrams, and that important connection is one of my favorite people, and I'm definitely sure one of your favorite people, your partner, Moeka, who I worked with for many years here at Adobe. So I'm just really excited that we've now finally kind of like connected the dots and are getting a chance to chat today. So
yeah, I didn't realize that when I was hearing about you over the years that we would end up in this place, but it's great to be here.
Always great. And it's always great to talk with other passionate and talented creatives like yourself. Again, that's another thing I've sort of always kind of admired from afar, is just really, your work and your practice and your trajectory. So before we kind of, get into category design, which I think is a really interesting topic, give us a little bit of your background. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how, your journey, in the creative world so far.
Sure. Yeah, so I was sort of practicing this with Moeka, going over what things I might say in this moment. And I think I wanted to start with my understanding, the audience is mostly students and aspiring designers. So I wanted to say something that might be useful to that kind of audience. And I want to start with when I was in high school, when I was 16, I started taking piano lessons. And I loved it. And I had this really cool piano teacher. His name was Bob Knightick, and he was a kind of he was a professional jazz pianist in New York City in the 50s and 60s. And he had retired up to rural Massachusetts where I lived. Wow. And he was when he would say hello to me, he'd call me Daddy-O. He was just like, man. And he played with Buddy Rich and all these jazz greats. And he really liked, so he started me off on blues piano, and then we moved to jazz from there. And he really liked he thought I was a really good student. He was quite surprised at, how well I was doing. So he moved my lesson to the end of the day, and so that he could spend a little more time with me at the end of the day. And pretty soon, I'm playing blues, and I look over and he's like on his guitar, and we're like jamming together, and so neat. And I was practicing a ton, and so after about a year of this, I thought, I want to do this professionally. This is what I'm going to do with my life. I found what I wanted to do. And I went back to Bob, the next time I had a lesson, and I was like, he's going to be so excited about this. And so I said, I have some news to share with you. This is what I want to do with my life. I'm going to become a professional pianist. And he wasn't excited. He was like, well, you could do that. But I just want to tell you that, it's very competitive, and you have to be practicing all the time, because if you're not, when you're sleeping, the person you're competing with will be practicing. And when you're eating, somebody else will be practicing. So if you're not ready to really devote your life to this, then, I don't think it's going to work. And it was exactly the opposite of what I thought he was going to say. I thought he was going to be really supportive, like, of course, I believe in you. You can do it.
Like all good teachers, those were told, like, should. Yeah.
And so, I really took it as very, very good advice. And within a week, I was like, I'm not doing that professionally. I don't have that much passion for playing piano. But it gave me a marker of, what I'm looking for in a career. If I can find something that I'm that excited about, then that could make for a really good career for me. And I knew I wanted to do something in the creative world. So fast forward to, I'm graduating from college. I went to Michigan State. I didn't go to design school, and I was sort of anti-capitalism, I guess, when I graduated from college, and was like, I'm never getting a normal job. I'm going to be an artist. I'm going to be a filmmaker. I'm going to write screenplays and wait tables, and fuck the system. And so I moved to Seattle, during the grunge days, as what was you were supposed to do. You were on that track. And 6 months into that, I was like, oh my God, I might end up just waiting tables for the rest of my life. What am I doing? And somebody had given me Photoshop, and it was 1994. And somebody was also, I had a friend who was like telling me about this thing called the World Wide Web. You got to check this out. Here's this browser, Mosaic. Mosaic was the first browser even before Netscape. It's like, here's how you make HTML. Here's how you use Photoshop. And I became obsessed with Photoshop and also the web. And so after a few months, I started calling around for jobs. I was actually, because my education was in video production, I was calling around for video editing, like editorial assistant jobs at video places. And they, I started doing this thing where I just called places out of the yellow pages. And I made a little simple CRM on my computer where I was tracking everybody that I talked to and what I said to them. And And I just kept calling places. And finally one place said, well, we have a little, we have like a multimedia design studio. Do you know how to design? And I was like, well, yeah, of course. Because I had Photoshop, right?
Perfect. You're set.
Yeah. And they were like, well, let me connect you. And they connected me to this place. The place was called Palazzo de Mix. And they connected me to that somebody there. And the person I was talking to, Eric, said, well, yeah, we actually are looking for design interns. And, do you know how to use Photoshop? And I was like, oh yeah, I know how to use Photoshop. Do you know how to use Illustrator? Oh yeah, I know how to use Illustrator. Do you have a portfolio? I was like, absolutely, I've got a portfolio. Then he was like, okay, well, it was Monday. So he said, well, can you come in on Wednesday at 3 and, show your portfolio, and, we may have an internship for you. I was like, great, I'll be there. I hung up the phone and was like, oh shit, now I have to make a portfolio. What am I going to do?
Yeah.
And so I immediately called the restaurant I was working at, and I said, I'm sick. I can't come in, and I stayed up for 48 hours making a portfolio of fake work.
Hey.
And, I think I slept like 2 hours on the second night, but, and it was crazy poetic in a way, because I was doing the thing that Bob Knightick, the piano teacher, was saying I needed to have this much passion in order for this to be a career for me. And I was staying up, for most part of 48 hours making a portfolio. And so I made up a fake record label. I made up a fake band called Neon Love Morgue. I did like their CD design, their posters, their kind of everything. I did a little web page for them where I just took a screenshot of Netscape and did some Photoshop work on top of that screenshot, on the top of that screenshot. And I shared my portfolio. I walked in with a portfolio. It was crazy.
Yeah.
And I was just like constantly qualifying my portfolio, like, oh, I just made all this up. This isn't a real website, But they liked it. They liked it, and they gave me the internship. And I'd been waiting tables for a long time because I did it through college.
Yeah.
And one thing about waiting tables is like a lot of times the boss, your manager doesn't ever want to see you sitting down.
Yeah.
That's not a thing that you do, right? Yeah. And I remember that when I first sat down at this design studio, they sat me down with Macromedia Director and a big book about how to use Macromedia Director. And they were like, you're helping us make a CD-ROM for Microsoft and start animating this blimp. And I sat down with my coffee and I was like, I can't believe somebody's paying me to sit down.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is why I'm doing this conversation sitting down.
Yeah, of course. There's so many overlaps. I mean, I remember that I had a very similar moment where I was going to be an architect, and then I had to take an elective, and that elective was a design elective. And I didn't really know that was a career path. Like, I kind of knew about architecture because, if anything, like, you knew some of those towering figures, and I had done like, hand-drawn, drafting and engineering and CAD and all that stuff. And then I got into the class, and we're using Photoshop. And like the first thing I designed, I started designing CD covers and rock and roll posters. I'm like, that's it. This is what I'm doing for the rest of my life. I'm making rock and roll posters. That's it, And it's always fascinating when we talk to other creatives to see some of those connection points, across different stories where it kind of clicks all of a sudden. It's like, oh, I can make a living at this. I can be paid to sit down and, like work, in my head and work with these tools and produce this work. And you're right. There's something that you were saying about, both from the piano teacher and from, this sort of this crazy manic 48 hours of putting together this portfolio and having that time to sort of fly by. I'm reading this book right now called The Craftsman. And there's something that sort of poignantly sort of came up in there that the craftsman is never really not working. Like, they might be working with their hands some of the time, but the rest of the time they're turning over the problems in their head, over and over and over again. There's those kind of like jokes about, especially our partners, who date designers, and they're like making fun of us for, critiquing the kerning on the title sequence of a movie. And, I was just thinking like, well, that's what it takes, to be a craftsman, to have this drive to do these creative lines of work, is that mindset where you're just constantly turning over those problems, even when you're not working, even when you're not putting, pixels to paper, or pixels to screen, as it were, right? That you really are thinking about that all the time, turning over those problems,
Yeah, that reminds me of something that I kind of wanted to bring up here, which is that, in this moment, there's sort of like two big forces at work in me relating to what we're doing. One big force is I want to do whatever it takes to get everybody here to love me and think that I'm awesome, right? And then on the other side of things, I just want to be myself, and I want to see if I can be helpful.
Yeah.
And those two things are completely opposing forces. You can't really have both, right?
Yeah.
And I think when you have a process, I think that we're sort of in relation to that idea of like, we want to do things to get people to admire us and think that our status is higher than we thought it was, or whatever. That you kind of always have that in a creative career.
Yeah.
And the question is like, since you can't get rid of it, and it doesn't really make the work better, the question is like, how do you relate to that and let it kind of subside a little bit, so the part that just wants to be authentically you and see if you can add some helpful thing to the universe can be more empowered, right? Yeah. And I think that process is one of the best ways that you can do that. When you have a process, it lets you set ego stuff aside a little bit and just kind of more honestly get into the work.
Yeah. I mean, we do spend so much energy, right, on our time, whether it is, getting our name out there, or our brand, or our, we're trying to get that next sort of level of promotion, climbing up those hierarchies. And we expend so much energy sometimes in that space. And we kind of forget, we kind of trick ourselves in a way. And because like the process is harder to kind of get into in a way, like it takes, getting that motor running a little bit sometimes. But then when you're in it, the process is such its own reward, and I think that's one of those things that I think, when I was going to design school, like when, I sort of made that leap, I said, I'm not going to be an architect, I'm going to be a designer. And there are these, these professors and these people who are out there practicing, and they were stressing, I think they're trying to get at something like that and trying to get that message across, that this is where the work is, and it will lead to its own results, and I always remember those moments when I gave myself over to a project, being at the end and just being completely satisfied with having come through that experience, and whatever that end thing was, I felt good about it. And, and I probably ended up in a place I never expected, because I was able to, just quiet all those other forces that are pressing in on us,
Yeah. But when you were a younger designer and people said, hey, it's all about the process, and weren't you ever like, well, yeah, but what is the process? I need to know what it is if it's all about the process.
Yeah. What is the secret? What is, yeah.
Because that's what I thought all the time. I was like, wait, what's the process? Maybe it's because I didn't go to design school, but I was always wondering, what is this process?
I think it's one of those things that you have to, in a way, like, find yourself. And so I think it is hard to communicate, to someone. Like, I can't follow, the routine of my mentors. I mean, I can try and ape that a little bit. I can try and work within that style, or work within those certain parameters. But within there, like, I've got to be able to find my own satisfaction in it. So even going to design school, like, it still felt like just a little bit unattainable in a way. And I felt like I was always striving for it, and never knowing it was there until it had happened. And I'm like, oh, that's what that was.
Yeah.
That's the thing you're always talking about.
Yeah. I mean, there was a moment in my career where I quit being a designer, because I was like, I just can't be, one of the best in the world at this. Cause I was spending too much time comparing myself to other designers. And I was like, I can't be as good as this person. And so I switched over to being a writer. I was a creative director doing mostly design, and I went back to portfolio school in my 30s, and I just switched to being a writer. And I felt like that was something that I could be, really great at. But it really took me, a while to realize, yeah, I can do this design thing really well, but it has to be my version of it. It can't be I'm trying to be this other, as like this other person, on their terms.
Yeah.
Yeah. But hey, we were talking about the process, and is this a good time to bring up the flywheel?
I think it is. I mean, again, like, I think it's so fast. Again, there's a couple of, I mean, we're going to get to a bunch of things, but this has been a fascinating one. And you shared this with me the other day, because we were talking about building a creative practice and building, a creative process or creative life, and you started kind of laying some knowledge on me in a way with this, and it's been stuck in my brain ever since. So no, I think this is a perfect time to bring this up and really talk about what motivated you to start to put this together, again, because as you were saying, like, it's not like once we get to a certain level of experience in our career that we've got it figured out. And I think the best creatives are always reassessing and rethinking and relaying it out and turning it over and really thinking to ourselves, what are we doing? What are we trying to get to? What is our goal ultimately? And I thought this was such a beautiful sort of distillation. And so, yeah, tell us a little bit, set it up for us a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So, this came out of, in our studio at Goldfront, part of what we do is create systems and processes. And that doesn't necessarily sound like the most creative thing. And sometimes it's not as fun as the creative piece of what we do. And I was trying to figure out a way to make it make sense in a larger, sort of more holistic idea of, what are we doing here and how do you really get better at what you do? How does everybody here at Goldfront get better at what they do every day? And so, our executive strategy director, Larry, and another strategy director, Ben, we worked up this flywheel of and we call it the great work flywheel. And it's how do you get to the place where you're doing great work? And so let's see, is that in frame the right way? Okay. And, Moika drew this up for me. So
very talented herself.
Yeah. Yep. And so, the way a flywheel works is every time you go around it, you get more energy. And you sort of do the steps, and it may be slow at first, but every time you take a circle around it, there's more and more energy, and it sort of takes on an inertia and a propulsion of its own. So this flywheel is about, doing great work. And it starts at the top with the desire to do great work. And, we all have that, just like this feeling like, I just want to do great work. And the next step in the process is you create a picture of success. So, Tibor Kalman was an amazing picture of success for me as a young designer. So you create that picture of success. What is it out there that you really aspire to do something like? And then you make some work, and your work is not nearly as good as your picture of success, right? And it can be pretty disappointing, and you want it to be better. And so there's sort of two things that you do from there. You hone your craft, so you get feedback, and you're sort of doing continuous learning around your craft. You get feedback from others, but you also are using your own critical thinking skills to ask yourself, why is this not as good as I want it to be? And then the other thing you do is you improve your habits and systems. So you say, could I get to my desk every, if I've got a job and I want to start doing something new, maybe I'll get to my desk every day at 8 a.m. and I'll have all social media off and everything else off, and I'm just designing. I'm just giving myself an hour to design, and that habit is a container for doing better work. And so you hone your craft, and you create better habits and systems, and the result of that is you will make better work when you do that. And when you make that better work, you have a little more confidence in the flywheel itself. And of course, once you make better work, you still want to do much better work than the work that you made. So you still have that ambition to do great work, and you just continue around the flywheel again.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about this a while, and we tried to like break it down to its most essential components. And
I love about that. It relates to the thing that we were talking about previously, which is the forces that are at war in the creative life, the forces to get your name out there, to achieve that status, climb that ladder,
be a creative director, get that senior designer title.
Yeah, exactly. And then we all wonder, like, why, once we've gotten there, like, why we don't actually feel better in a way. We don't appreciate sort of that, attaining whatever that status is, right? In a way, it's kind of empty. So what I love about this flywheel that you're doing is you're sort of putting the desire to do better work, right? And that can mean something personal to each creative. Like your definition of what better means is personal, it's unique to your work and your process. And and so I like that's sort of the key framing device here is that it's not a title, it's not the accolades, it's not the number of followers. It is, how do I work better, and what does better mean for me, for me in my context? And then how can I look around and find those models of what I deem as would be success. I'm defining my own success, not someone else's success, not someone else imposing their idea of success on me. And that then being kind of the starting point and kind of that generator of just like making that flywheel up and getting that momentum that you need to go and to do better work and to quiet out all those forces that are constantly sort of encroaching on your headspace.
Along those lines, I wrote down some of the things that happen when you go around the flywheel. There's some things that are generated, and one is creative confidence. You become more confident in your own skills. Second is the work gets better. Third is you have more and more belief that the flywheel works. So you start to believe in a system. That's really, really important.
Yeah.
And the fourth thing I think is really interesting, because you said, well, what is great work? Is that great work to be like, so that I'm like this other person who I think does great work? And it can't really be that. And I think the fourth thing that it really does is it helps.
Oh, Josh, did I lose you?
It helps us find our voice.
Yeah. I mean, I think that to me was always one of those alchemical kind of things, right? There are these people that mentors or people that you looked up to or aspired to, and you're like, how do you find your own voice? How did they do that? Going back to our conversation, but it doesn't even matter if you go to design school or not. There's still something that the work that you need to do to define that for yourself. And once you've done that, like I said, it can generate its own momentum. It can generate the confidence you need. It can generate you and take you to a place that you didn't expect. And but you trusted that you were going to get there at some point.
And I think that voice is something that it's sort of just inside of all of us already, and it needs to be uncovered. And I think as long as when we commit ourselves to that flywheel over and over, just slowly our natural voice comes out.
I agree. Well, I also wanted to make sure that we didn't leave people without some I think really interesting information. Is that let's maybe segue back a little bit and let's talk about Goldfront and talk about tell us about Goldfront and tell us about your team and tell us about dig into category design for us. Tell us about what that is and where that came from.
Yeah, sure. So Goldfront is a category design studio. That means that we help startups create and own their own category. Startups all the way to, post IPO tech companies. And category creation and category leadership is probably the biggest force that we have in the world of business. If you talk to any CEO, they want to be a category leader. Every CEO, every executive team wants to be a category leader. It's something that Adobe has been incredibly successful at. If you look at all the products that Adobe has, they are the leader in most of the categories that they play in. And that's why Adobe has done so well. And so that's the language of startups and CEOs and founders, is how do we lead a category? How do we create an entirely new category? And the reason for that is that category leaders capture about 70% of all the profits in the category. And it's really helpful to look at money as like a fuel for what is happening in everything that we're doing in the world of business. When you see like, okay, this is where the money is, and you want to not only make a good living for yourself and your family, but you also want to do good in the world, it helps to understand what those forces are. And so, category creation and category leadership is at the top of, those forces. Now, what that means for our work is we help founders and CEOs define the category that they're creating and make sure that when they come out into the world, they're not creating something that is incrementally better. They're not going out to the world saying, we made something a little bit better, we made something a little bit easier, we made something a little faster, we made something a little cheaper. No, we're like, this is an entirely new species of thing in the world. And that's really what gets people's attention. And that's where we put our attention when it comes to new products, is things that are categorically different. And so that's on the strategy side of what we do. And there's a lot of overlap with brand strategy, but it's also different.
Yeah.
And then the category design studio basically means that we do that category strategy piece, and then we do all of the creative execution that our clients need to go out and launch and grow their category. And so one way to think about it is, innovation. We have this kind of explosion of innovation. And if you think about, well, what is a company? What's a startup? What is a tech company? You could look at it as, we make new things, we make new innovations, and then we also have to figure out how to frame or tell the story of that innovation in the mind of the customer. You could make something that is a crazy good innovation, but if you can't tell the story of it and you can't get that category to tip in the mind of the customer, they've constructed this picture of what it is. Ride sharing is a thing in the world, right? There is a technical innovation, but then there is our mental model of what ride sharing is. And because Uber framed that conversation, that category idea in our minds first, we all think that they should be the leader. And that's why they lead that category.
Yeah. It's something that resonates with me, because I think this is something that I've always bumped up against as I got out into the world and I was doing, professional work, working with clients, working with internal stakeholders, is that in a lot of ways they want to sort of put design in a box, right? They want to say, well, in their mind, there's a conception of what design does. It's usually executional, right? It's usually like, here, go and make the pixels, go and make the thing pretty, just make this look good, and that's you always run into that. I think you're running into it less and less, because I think the profile of design has grown, but I think that's been through the work of creatives like yourself and others who have said, well, the skill set of design, of the creative approach to these problems is to look at it from sort of all the angles. That you need the foundation of research. You need the sort of deep critical thinking about the product or the innovation and what it actually is doing, and then to connect the dots then to the needs of the customer or the user or segment, right? And that Once you've done that and established that framing, now you have that framing or that system to now go and execute in, right? And that's the thing that, again, like that's why I got into design, was because the minute we got past just like in designing rock and roll posters, you started to see like, oh, this is what I've been trying to do all my life, is to connect the dots across all these things and use that baseline of knowledge to go and create something that tells a story, that tells the meaning of something, that communicates an idea. And like that's what I don't know, resonated so much with me as we first started digging into this, is like, well that's design in its sort of essence to me.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I worked at I was a freelance creative director at Macromedia back when Al Ramadan was the CMO. And Al is one of the 4 authors of this book called Play Bigger, which is the book on category design. And they coined the term category design. And before that at Macromedia, experience design was a really big deal. And I think, when experience design kind of came out as a big thing around 2000-ish, I think that's when we really all started cluing into, culturally, that design was this amazing thing that could be very specific and concrete to the craft of making something, and all the way up to the highest level, how do you build a business and how do we solve really big problems for the world? And I think everybody, when you make a career, it's important to think about where in that spectrum you want to be, because there's people who dedicate their whole lives to the craft of making something beautiful, type and things like that. They're so essential to great design. And it's hard to be at that very high level. How are we going to solve climate change or whatever it might be, and then also be like, I'm one of the world's great typographers, right? And so it's important for us as designers to ask, like, where in that spectrum do we want to be?
Yeah. That kind of reminds me of something you said that just kind of resonated with me again with this book that I referenced earlier, The Craftsman, where you need those individuals, in a creative field or in a political field, who also are doing connecting the dots and creating the story in which connect the crafts of all these different sort of endeavors. And and I think you're also pointing out, like, there are different ways in which any creative person can approach this. Like, you can be focused more on the craft and the execution of kind of like one particular sort of endeavor, or you can sort of work to pull together all these different threads, and that the craftsman in some ways actually needs that someone, that creative person, that creative thinker and storyteller to put those pieces together, to really enable the true potential. I feel like that a lot, working here at Adobe in sort of my capacity, where I'm working with these amazingly smart craftspeople, who are doing engineering these products, and I'm working with these researchers. I'm working with these other craftspeople who have this base of knowledge that they're working within. And we can make each other better in collaborating and pushing each other and creating that larger context in which all that work can sing, all that work will have its place and connect directly with users. And in our case, right, where we're sort of trying to create a space in which people can then interact with that technology that sometimes, if without that work, can be very, very obscure or obtuse, opaque, right? Like, if you don't have someone who's putting the experience on top of that, creating an experience that is usable, that focuses on, like the user's journey through that experience. What would that technology be good for, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah. That reminds me of a thought here. I want to connect category design to what does that mean to a designer, and category design. One of the things that one of its foundations is that when you create a new product or new anything, you want it to be categorically different, not incrementally different. And that when something is categorically different, that's the moment that people pay attention to it, are interested. if you are saying you're incrementally better than a category leader, it's very hard to get anyone's attention, because people just still tend, if somebody came out right now and said, hey, we did a little bit better version of ride sharing, you should try us, no one's going to pay any attention to that, right? And so that's a foundation of category design. And I've been kind of wrestling with this question of like, well, how does that apply to designers? Because I was going to talk with you today, and when we were talking earlier last week, we arrived at something that I thought was a really interesting thought, which is, you can't really category design yourself as a designer because you're an individual, and it just doesn't work as well. And categories don't work as well for human beings as they
do for products.
As they do for products. Yeah. And when we were talking about the flywheel, as we talked about that, is that even though you're creating a picture of success, which is somebody else, and you keep going around that flywheel, somehow you don't end up making stuff that's just like that picture of success. You end up making the Talon version.
Yeah.
And you actually find your voice when you do that.
Yeah.
And when you find your voice, you become a category of one. There's nobody else that has that voice. And so you're now categorically different than everybody else. And I think, in there is very fertile territory for building a career, because whether you're at an Adobe or you're at a smaller design studio, if you can be known for, something that is different than what every other designer is doing, then, you're on your way.
Yeah. And, just to maybe just kind of dig into that a little bit more, because I think sometimes, especially as you're younger in your career, you attach a lot of importance and value to the output, right? To the thing that, the visual artifact that comes out of you and its uniqueness in the world and its originality. And that's a little bit of a trap in a way, right? It's been fascinating to sort of watch design kind of grow on the internet. You're kind of in this age where we're also all connected and we're sharing work, and you can see a lot of these little battles crop up really around in things that again are outside of what it means to build a design practice, which is things like copyright. Who owns these pixels, right? And are we distracting from, again, well, yes, you can go and copy those pixels, but what you can't do is copy that person's process, right? Whoever that person is, that person who's established
or you
that
can't copy their voice.
Yeah, exactly. You can't copy their voice, right? They'll go on to make more and more and more work and continue to grow and build their voice and build their process. And that pixel, whatever that is, whatever that visual artifact is a snapshot in time. And sure, like people can copy that, but it doesn't take away from the value that you bring to the table. And I remember I followed, in the formative days of Tumblr, I followed a lot of illustrators, and that was one of those insights I felt like I gathered from following these illustrators. Is it wasn't about the things the things they were making were beautiful for sure, but the truth was they were opening up and talking about how they worked and their process, their voice, and you can't replicate that. You can do something that's maybe a shade this way or that way, but if you go through this work of developing that voice, that creative practice, that's where the value lies. That's where you continue to generate.
I mean, I totally agree. But I think it's hard when you're in your 20s or just starting out to even believe that you have an interesting voice. It's like, what if I find my voice and nobody cares and nobody likes my voice? There's a lot of those kinds of worries, and those are real concerns.
They are.
What if I am authentically myself and I get crickets back, right?
Yeah. What keeps you going? What keeps you pushing forward? I watched a video of Jonathan Richman. I've been listening to a lot of Jonathan Richman and the Modern Lovers this week. It just been on a kick. And I watched a video with him the other day, and this other musician was talking to him and trying to get him to talk about being a punk, in the 70s. And he's like, oh no, we didn't know, we had nothing to do with that. He's like, he was just trying to say something using, in his voice, and what gives a person like that that drive to keep going in the face of, like crickets, like, you're playing a club and there's like a handful of people and you're like, what makes you keep going, from, I mean, that is kind of the dilemma that creatives, like, how do you find that within you?
Yeah. I mean, another thing I would want to call out a little bit is when I, interview for interns, design interns, one thing I also see is that I wish portfolios were a little bit more designed so that they are relevant to the conversation that's going on in visual culture today.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a complex and tricky thing that, you could just say, well, I'm just being myself. I'm totally different. That could result in some really bad design too. Right.
Yeah.
And, or something that maybe you love, but, there's no market for.
Yeah.
And, design is a commercial thing for the most part.
Yeah.
And one thing I would like to see more is design and intern candidates coming in with work that is a little bit more connected to the kind of visual culture of today. That feels like, okay, this is in conversation with visual culture of the conversation that the world is trying to have visually right now. And I think those two things are, it's kind of complicated. How do you find your voice and be yourself, and then, but also, relate to the community out there and what all else is going on.
Yeah. I mean, you said a great point about design being, at its core, this being a profession, a commercial profession. Right. And so there's a bit of problem solving, right? Like, you do need to be able to connect with the current context in which you are creating in some way, whether that's in direct opposition to, right. And you understand that, you understand that very clearly.
Yes.
Like, I understand what the grid is, and I'm going to break it because I understand it, and so there is something I think you're saying that resonates with me, where you do, as a creative, have to understand the context, and you are positioning yourself within there, in certain ways, whether, again, that's to push it forward, to innovate within it, or to break it completely and move another way. And you have to have that awareness that when you go into an environment, like, you're kind of designing that story, as you're telling it, you're setting yourself up, in relation to that current context, whatever it is,
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, I wanted to take just a moment to share a little bit of our work. So
yes, please. I was just going to ask you, we get onto such fascinating topics and we get down these tangents, and then I'm like, wait, we had some stuff we wanted to talk about, because I would love for you to kind of, showcase a little bit more about what you mean when you talk about category design, how it impacts, the work that your studio is creating, and how you go and work with stuff to help.
Yeah. So Kendall, could you pull up the slides? Mostly, I just wanted to show you the kind of design that we're sort of doing day to day.
Yeah.
Now, first of all, we're here most of us are here in San Francisco. And so we've just kind of made this place working for really interesting startups and tech companies, and find that work fascinating. And it seems like it's just, to me, it's the most interesting thing that's going on in business today, all this innovation. This is a brand that we designed for our client Clary. A lot of what we do is brand design. So we'll go do the category strategy. In Clary's case, they're a revenue operations platform. We help them frame the story of that category so that it's sort of in their favor. And a year later, they're being ranked by G2 as the leader of that category. So, to the degree that we help them at all, we're on the right track there. And besides defining the category and framing the story of that category, so for example, in Clary's case, they are really good at forecasting revenue 3 months in the future. They have AI that can take in a bunch of information about what your revenue team is doing, and then tell you 3 months in the future, within 4%, what your revenue actually will be in the future. And so for them, that story was really important. But then there's the other question, which is, how do you show up as a leader? And how you show up as a leader is more about this question of voice. So The category is sort of the what is the story, and maybe the why did we create this category? What's our deeper purpose? But then there's this other question of how. What's our personality? What is it that feels right to us as a way to speak? And they really wanted to be that the how in Clary's cases, they wanted to be buttoned up for business, but also human and not as stodgy as a typical enterprise firm. So that's how we sort of landed on this look and feel for them.
Yeah, there's some like humanizing that, like, and this is like especially AI, right? That can be a very cold sort of unapproachable technology. And so how do you connect that with the needs of real humans and their desires and their goals?
Yeah, that's kind of our jam. Is like, how can we take something that's pretty technical and bring out the humanity piece of it? Now I'm just going to blow through these slides.
I love it. No, yeah.
We're like, we don't have a lot of time left.
We're gonna, and I may pause and we get hopefully some questions rolling in. So if any of you have questions for Josh, please feel free to add them. Tom's gonna just feed them right to me. So we'll be able to be sure to answer some questions here. There was already one. I just want to let you know if we can bring up the flywheel before we end.
Sure. Yeah, Kurt Jackson. Yeah, yes. We'll make sure that
we'll hit it, Kurt. We'll get it. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of what we do is making sure that the brand design and digital actually works as a cohesive whole, which is not that easy. It used to be that brand and digital were done by two totally different teams. Yeah, like you just can't work like that anymore. No. Brand and digital have to be working together.
Digital is that dominant medium, the ways in which most users now are interfacing with these products and services, right? So any of these endpoints, like that whole story needs to be connected from those all the way through to the product itself.
Right. Bizzabo is an event experience platform. We help them define and launch that category. We also then rebranded the company once we defined their category. They launched this category back in October. It's been very, very successful for them as a way to stand out. They were before that in the event management software space.
Yeah.
And this is something that, our clients do to really stand out in the world because it's a noisy world and you have to figure out a way to stand out. And Silo is a adaptive food platform. They're actually connecting all of the food that needs to move around the world on a single platform. So they're doing something really good for the world.
Yeah.
And this is the brand that we designed for them after we did the category strategy.
Yeah.
And then, we also do campaigns. So, we did a global campaign for Slack. We did a national TV campaign for Robinhood and this, out-of-home campaign for Sir Kensington's.
Yeah.
So.
Maybe give us a little, I love the beautiful work, Josh, and from the team. And oh my goodness, that little word mark, that little logo type down on the bottom is lovely as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's really nice.
Kendall, you could take the that slide up. Thanks.
Very nice. Talk about maybe just a little bit about the client engagements. Like how are the clients responding to the work? Like when you come and say we do category design, how do you
oh man, it's great. One of the things that's hard about having an agency is that most agencies positioning are very, very similar. Yeah. We are a product and brand agency. We specialize in bringing humanity and rigor and science to the work, and of course, a lot of that can be very meaningful, but it's very hard to stand out when you tell your story that way. Yeah. And for us, when we meet a client and say we're a category design studio, we help startups create and own their own category, and we do that from strategy end to end all the way through creative execution. They're like, oh, I totally get that that's something different in the world, and I'm really interested to hear more about it. And it's just a great position to be in when you can say that we are something different than everything else that exists.
You had a great story you shared on that the other day, and I wanted to make sure we got it in here because I asked you about if there was this epiphany moment that you sat down and said, we're going to be a category design studio, and started with that. And I wanted you to maybe share that because I think it's relevant to this, what you're saying, which is it is hard to stand out. Everyone's using very similar words to describe a series of services that they offer.
What part of the story?
The one where you were at the SoDA.
Yeah. So I went to a sales seminar for through SoDA, and there was an expert, Blair Enns, who was helping us understand how we pitch, and yeah, I think there was like 40 agency leaders that were at the seminar, and Blair said, "Why don't everybody go around and say a little bit about like what your agency does." And we were a creative studio before that, which is a pretty general thing. And I had been playing with this idea of we're a category design studio, and we had been doing category strategy for years before that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just tried it out in the room, and sort of had that experience of every agency leader just about was saying almost the same thing: product and brand and humanity and science and data and when it got to me, I said, "I'm Josh Lowman, and Goldfront is a category design studio. We help startups create and own their own category." And Blair Enns, I remember, was like, "Oh, yeah, that's good," and you could just feel that it was something that was different than kind of what everybody else was saying. And so that's when I was like, okay, we're onto something.
Yeah. And I mean, and like we talked about the kind of references earlier, the designers are constantly sort of doing that self-evaluation, really thinking about, okay, this is the context. Everybody's saying these words. How do I do great work? Find my voice? Kind of going back to the flywheel a little bit, that like, this is a, constant iterative process that creatives are going through. Might be a good time for Kurtz to get a little picture back at the flywheel here as I tee up the next question. There it is. Perfect. Everybody screenshot. Go.
And I also put, it's a way for me to send this out later. I could do
yes, that. I'm sure people would absolutely love that. Yeah.
Kurtz, you can just email me too, Kurtz. It's Josh@Goldfront. So wait, so there's a question here.
Yeah. So it's from Drew Dove. Okay. What are the best ways to keep track of what design is popular? Like what is that context? How do you keep track of what's going on in the world? And then, as a way to continue to sort of evaluate and find your voice within it. What's a good way you do?
I mean, I'm just a lover of agencies and of great work. So I follow everything Collins does, everything Instrument does, everything DIA does. Like, I just follow what they do because I really admire those companies and their creative work. And I do it in my free time whenever. I'm constantly on like LinkedIn or Instagram sending posts back to our company Slack channel. Check out this work. I think that's it. It just kind of starts with loving other agencies and other designers' work.
Yeah, and that curiosity, right? Just that awareness. Again, there's a reference to the sort of point in the Craftsman that the Craftsman is never really done working. That there's a drive and an interest and a curiosity in the field that you've chosen to be creative.
Yeah.
And that's just that ambient awareness, whether you're actively seeking it out or that's the eye in which you're evaluating the world. Those things all help. Those things all build that foundation that when you do sit down and you do put the pen to paper or the mouse pointer to pixels, that those are the things that will be informing you, in that ambient way. It's just like the world, the context in which you work.
Yeah.
Well,
it's a kind of preoccupation. Constant preoccupation with other work that's out there, or just out in the city looking at out of home stuff, especially like if you go to when I stay in Williamsburg in New York, there's like all kinds of great out of home visual culture there.
And everybody Tibor. If you don't know Tibor Kalman, everyone should also go do a little deep dive into Tibor as well. Because you mentioned
absolutely.
I want to give a little shout out there because another formative one where the connection, Tibor was really big in the circles in which I ran and for a long time in design school. So big hero of mine as well. Well, cool. Well, Josh, such a pleasure. I feel like we could go on, twice as long as this and still not run out of things to talk about. Just want to say thank you so much for spending the time. I'm so glad we had this opportunity. Tom, thanks for giving us this platform on which to have this great conversation. And thanks, Josh. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you, Josh and Talon. What a great discussion. I loved, I love that kind of insight around being categorically different versus incrementally different. I think that's a really good just mantra and kind of guide for, for the work we do and thinking about it and critiquing it through that lens. I also love that insight about, working to find your own voice. And once you truly find your own voice, you are by definition a category of one at that point. Very, very, very cool. So, and for the audience, just quickly, if you're interested in learning more about category design or following this, Josh has launched a podcast on category design called Category Teardowns.
Actually, you know what?
Yeah.
We started that, but we ended that one. We started a new one called Category First.
Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. I got the name wrong, but yes. So Category First, if you head over to goldfront.com, you can find details on that and follow along. But guys, thanks again. What a great conversation today. Love working with you to bring these conversations to the design community. So thank you both.
Thank you.
And for the audience, thanks for being here today. We appreciate it. The next session will be on May 26th, and we'll be joined by our friends from Monogrid. Monogrid is an incredibly talented digital design studio based in Florence, Italy. And so we'll look forward to that on May 26th. We hope to see some of you then. Until then, have a great day, evening, morning, wherever you're calling in from. And thanks again for joining the SoDA Series Live.